Oh, look who's joining me. It's my TV show co-host.
What the fuck are those?
Yeah, it just happens a lot now. I got a new computer and it does weird effects like this one. Well, do rock fist. That's a look at what I'm doing and just do that.
I can't.
Whatever. Anyway, this episode's on classical music. It was done with music professor and just all-around smart guy, the Riz Master, Tom Rizzuto, as well as my, at the time, producer, Grant Goldberg, who is just a classical music wunderkind. Wunderkind. There's a whole Ted Lasso episode about that. Yeah, I don't, spoiler alert, I don't hate classical music as much anymore.
Ooh.
Yeah, and what we're going to hear first is the longer version than the podcast originally showed out of the little performance that Grant gives us of a classical music song on ukulele. And if you don't like it, skip ahead 2 minutes. But it's nice. Listen to it. Get some culture in your goddamn life.
Yeah, open up your mind and heart and soul.
Mm-hmm.
Like he did.
I'm such a big person now, and better in person. Enjoy!
Wait, where's mine? Fireworks!
Whoa! Welcome to Don't Mind If I Don't. I'm your host, Aaron Gold, and this is the podcast where I don't like things, and we have wonderful super fans and experts come on and tell me why I'm wrong. And the reason why Grant Goldberg, our producer, just rocked that ukulele just now is because we are doing a classical episode.
You could say I balked that ukulele.
I won't. Guys, thank you so much for joining us. We've got two amazing experts. First of all, a professor of music history, a teacher of music, and a contributor to the Rock and Roll Archaeology Project podcast, Tom Rizzuto is here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And then the aforementioned co-host of You Are Not Alone with Me, and the producer of this very show, classical music genius Grant Goldberg.
Genius might be a little.
You're only selling yourself short.
Why am I being modest? I'm the fucking max classical.
You are the expert today.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much for being here, Grant. That was lovely.
Thanks. I haven't played in a long time.
Well, Grant, I'd like to say that I was just reading an article from 1910 talking about how the ukulele could never be used for classical music, and you proved that lady wrong.
Prove that bitch
Let's
wrong.
get her. Yeah. Let's find her and let's beat the shit out of her. Guys, why do you like classical music?
Okay, they're all looking at me, so I'll start. Sure. So I started playing guitar when I was a kid, and being the pretentious kid I was, like playing rock and roll guitar wasn't good enough, so I started playing classical guitar. Actually, the truth was that there was a high school in my city that had a classical guitar program, so I liked playing guitar, and I was like, I can do it at school, and so I did that, and then I studied with a bunch of cool people through high school, and then I went to college for it, and over the way, I picked up some pieces of music that I just really, really thought were freaking awesome. So I would sit around in class. I remember sitting around in English class in 9th grade, maybe 10th grade, just listening to Dvorak symphonies and Prokofiev and Swan Lake, and that was, I don't know, just something.
2 of those sounded like words.
Yeah, well, 2 of them were names.
Proper nouns, whatever.
And I like it. I actually, to be completely honest, I'm not much of a quote unquote classical music person in terms of the period classical music. I've never really.
All right, Grant, you can go home. Tom, why do you know?
I've never really been into Mozart. Anything kind of that's kind of the epicenter of what I don't really love, and then kind of spreading out from there. Older music and newer music, I'm really much more into. So I don't know if that answers why I love it, but.
It gives you an idea.
Yeah.
Tom.
Well, this is great because Grant and I are going to make a great team because that middle area that he doesn't like is my favorite stuff. I am a first-generation classical music fan. I did not grow up with classical music. I have a similar story to Grant. I started playing guitar when I was around 13 and had no ambitions to be anything more than a blues or rock guitarist. And then through that, I started taking music theory classes and then started to learn about the history of classical music, and that's what really drew me in. And I think I'm just fascinated with what can be done with music and all the things that classical composers have done with music throughout time and how it's evolved. That's what really drew me into it.
I will say it's got a lot of range.
Oh, yeah.
Well, okay, so if you've listened to this podcast, you know that everything goes on a bit of a rating system. There's been some confusion about that, but let me clarify how the rating system goes. If it is at a 10, it is blood-curdling hatred. I can't stand it. A 0 would be complete ambivalence to me. I don't feel any negative feelings about it or care. Before I listened to the hours of music you guys sent me, I was about at a 3. Never really listened to it out of choice. I just didn't care. Now, after listening to it all, I'm at a 7. I get annoyed with how bored it makes me feel. It doesn't make me it's just annoying and so slow. It's music that makes me sound it's music that sounds like I'm doing a favor for my parents. It's also long and so repetitive, and honestly for me a lot of the draw for most music that I listen to is really smart lyrics, and granted a lot of the lyrics to classical music are just in other languages, so that's on me for being a Philistine. But I'm not going to deny it takes so much talent to do this stuff. It's just so long and boring and repetitive. One of the songs you sent me, that John Adams thing, I would have fucking loved that if it was 4 minutes long. It was 25 minutes long of the same thing.
Yeah, well, I think Tom did send you a more famous piece called Short Ride in a Fast Machine, which is also John Adams.
I hated pretty much all the things that you sent, Tom.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
The thing that I liked most of all the stuff you sent me was Jupiter.
Awesome, yeah.
Yeah, Jupiter was great. That was dynamic and cool.
And that sits in a sweet spot of kind of more... That's more of the music that's been co-opted for film. So that's... in fact, there's a very specific moment in I think Mars that like John Williams rips off. There's a moment in Scythian Suite from Prokofiev that John Williams, like, it's like a chord that he just takes and puts into Star Wars. Like, so music from around that era, that kind of nationalist composer era, which is like the early 1900s, late 1800s, is often where film composers kind of draw upon. So it's more familiar. I think.
Most of the music you sent me from movies?
None of it, except for possibly if you listen to any of the Prokofiev. But that was very early.
Note that one of them, what was it? Oh yeah, Concerto de Toronto sounds like a Superman movie up top.
Yeah, there's some really cool moments in there.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that piece blows my fucking mind.
And I was wrong. I Short Ride, I did like that. That was the first piece of classical music I did like.
Yeah, and that's John Adams, but on a short piece.
So when we're saying John Adams,
it's the same. Yeah, it's the president that.
Okay.
No, it's not.
Okay.
He's still alive. This is a composer.
All right, this is really good to know because when I first was listening to that long John Adams piece, I was just thinking like, how did this fit into that Paul Giamatti thing? Because like, when would they have had the time?
Also, not the music of the era. I think that music would have fucking like fucked with their minds. They would have had said exactly what you said about it. Like, it's too repetitive. It's too like dislinear. It's so choppy and
also I didn't realize this. George Washington was about like in his 40s when Beethoven was born.
Oh yeah.
What?
Putting the timeline together is one of the most interesting things, and I think one of the things that is most important about appreciating classical music is understanding how it fits into the context of the world.
So would you say that like a part of the draw of classical music for both of you, are you guys like into history?
100%, yeah.
I'm super bad at history. I failed music history 3 times. Except when I got into NYU, I somehow passed all the entrance exams. But anyway.
Humble brag, but okay.
Music history is not my strength because it's a lot of like this count and that countess, commissioned this piece from this person. But I do like, and I'm not very good at like cross-referencing like, okay, during the American Revolution, what was the like big piece of music that was coming out in Europe? Like that's... just isn't directly connected in my brain. But I do like knowing the historical context of a piece of music, like it was commissioned for this purpose, or this was kind of the attitude of the time that surrounded the release of this music. And we can talk about stuff like maybe Rite of Spring or something.
Well, 2 things for you. One is that you probably had horrible music history teachers because they're all over the place.
I had one really
Tom
good
just
one.
slid his business card across the table.
Yeah. I had one really good one, and then one that was like notoriously like just tough.
That's usually how it goes. Another thing, just fun fact, not only was George Washington alive and aware of Beethoven, but Ben Franklin invented a musical instrument that Beethoven composed for.
Yeah.
The harpsichord?
No, the glass harmonica.
There's a glass harmonica?
It's not a harmonica.
Harmonica, without the H.
I just want to say you both fuck off. Both of you. Like,
it's an electric instrument. It rotates.
What?
Yeah.
It rotates. You're familiar with running your wet finger across a crystal glass and hearing that sound? It's based on that. It's a progressively larger set of spinning glass bowls that you wet your fingers and you play as though you were playing a piano while they rotate.
Grant, are you bringing up a picture of this?
I am bringing up a soundbite. That's not it yet, but you'll get it.
It was huge in Europe, and actually the German authorities thought that it drove people insane, so they made it illegal.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, I have heard this before.
Well, you've heard this piece before, but it's not.
But I think, How long can we play this before we get sued?
That long.
All right,
just about that.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll trim it up in post or something.
But I would also say that Aaron
was under 30. Yeah.
If I could say, Aaron, all of your complaints about classical music, 100% true. They're 100% true. They're 100% valid.
Thank you.
Well, you're right. I mean, it's unquestionably repetitive.
I got an A in this class.
It's a lot of it's meant to be repetitive, particularly John Adams.
Why? What's the benefit of that?
There are historical reasons for that.
There are a lot of reasons, yeah.
Yeah. And it is really long, and there's no getting around that. People had more free time back then.
Because I can't deny the immense talent that's going into all these people playing these instruments, and generally talent alone is enough to get me to really dig like a piece, or at least really respect it. But it feels like kind of a waste when it's not. It's just the same thing for 30 minutes.
I think forget about that for a second. Like, forget about talent, because talent goes into all music. I mean, I don't want to say that classical musicians are somehow more talented or more like dedicated to music. That's one thing that I really kind of hated about classical music before I got into it.
Yes,
There's
I want
a lot
to
of
talk about that in
pretension.
a second.
Yeah, it's a lot. Even in
yeah.
the real, existing classical music community, that's kind of a philosophy that some people hold, and I do not like that.
Yeah, I honestly, like, that's, I think, part of the draw, in that all classical music, like, they're all wearing tuxedos. They all are so fancy. It strikes me as a genre that does not, that refuses to that can only take itself seriously. No, there's no comedy. There's no fun.
That's not true. That's so not true. And the problem is, you don't know I don't want to blame it on you. It's not your fault.
Because I did more research for this episode than I've done for any of the previous episodes.
But I
never wanted the Sonic episode to happen again. I felt so much shame. But like,
I would go so far as to say that it is more classical music's fault, or the classical music community's fault, than it is your fault, because you have subscribed to a misconception that they have done nothing to dissuade people.
Well, then let's dissuade it right now. You two save classical music for people like me.
Cool. Should I want to start, because I'm into contemporary music. Not all contemporary music, because it also kind of suffers from some massive pretension in certain circles. But I'll talk more about music is the same throughout history. It just sounds different, and it has different purposes. So,
I don't want to just keep saying "fuck you," but I mean,
so it can sound totally different from, like, if you're comparing like Palestrina to like let's say Ligeti or something.
Can you use examples of things I know?
So Palestrina is, I think, at least in one of my drafts, Palestrina was a composer from 1450s-ish?
I don't know its exact years, but it's around there.
Yeah, and this is back before really music notation is standardized in the same way we know it now. It's back before, most modern instruments were developed. There were kind of like organ type instruments, there were string instruments, but most music was written for voice, and it was written for groups of people singing in harmony, and very different kind of harmony than we're kind of used to. It's not 3-note chords that follow strict progressions. Instead, it's strict rules governing how those notes, lines interact with each other.
So it's kind of like I wish I
strict
wrote
rules
down which piece it was, but like there was one of the pieces I think that you sent me, Grant, where it was just so much voice. Like there were the video had tons of people in it, like one woman leading, but like.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was that's Mahler. That's the Mahler second. Yeah.
Like, so is that what you're talking about?
No. And see, that's a completely different context. What I'm talking about would have been a small room of people. You might have, you could have like a full, it was church music.
Yeah.
So imagine it being performed in a church.
Okay.
And a lot of the rules enforced on it were given from the church. Like when you played music in a church back then, you could not have instruments for the most part, except for a small approved instrument list. And you had to follow certain rules in terms of what harmonies you used and what kind of voices you used. Wow. So,
because the church has always been crazy.
Yeah, that's fair.
No good reason, but
this is where like the organs came in.
Well,
there were even restrictions, and this is kind of I don't know how true this holds, but there's like the kind of old joke of like the band harmony, like you couldn't play a tritone or whatever. So that was verboten for a long time.
It's true in the sense that you couldn't do it. I don't think anybody was ever burned at the stake for it, as some people tell you. But it's interesting that you bring up Palestrina, because Palestrina was the one non-clergy person invited to the Council of Trent, which is where they came up with a whole new set of rules for the Catholic Church. And he single-handedly basically saved music, because he convinced the Pope that we could allow instruments in the church. And he did so by writing a mass called the Pope Marsalis Mass. So through his talent and the Pope's vanity, we were able to keep music going.
And now look at that and think about like Tipper Gore and the what is it? The
same shit.
The RIAA, and what was the name of her association? The whatever, the bunch of angry moms who were. No, ASCAP's something different and also evil, but we'll ignore that for now. Just angry moms trying to.
I hope that there's somebody at ASCAP listening to this going like, all right, they went 35 seconds on that music clip. I'm going to let them go. And then we get to that and they're like, that was my line. All right.
Yeah, exactly.
Writing an email right now.
We're only going to use music that's represented by BMI and we'll be okay.
I laughed. I don't know what that is.
It's very inside baseball.
It's very inside
baseball
joke.
It's a smaller version of ASCAP. Well, if you own a bar, you have to pay money to ASCAP and BMI and like a couple of other smaller.
I had BMI once. Okay, so you guys said there's a reason for them being so long.
Well, I wouldn't say. Yes and no. There's a reason for them being so repetitive, and that's because a lot of what went into classical music composition was development. So what you were hearing as repetition may have just been straight repetition, but a lot of it was a development on a theme. So one musical theme developed, which means it would be played over and over and over again. And every time changed just a tiny bit or harmonized in just a tiny different way. And you do have to train yourself to hear these things. So upon your first listening, especially if this was the first time you had heard classical music in a while.
This is the first time I've heard classical music out of choice. I mean, like my mom listens to it. My dad sometimes, I grew up hearing it now and then, but my parents weren't like the type to like play music a lot all the time.
This is how I compare it, right? So I'm looking at Grant's recording setup here, and I couldn't tell you what any of this is. And if I were to listen to this, and if I were to listen to something that I recorded at home on my computer, I probably couldn't tell the difference, but Grant probably could, because Grant has been doing recording for so long.
Grant, if you're going to shrug, make it audible.
I mean, I was just more of a polite, like don't sell yourself short kind of shrug.
Well, no, I mean, I don't know anything about recording, but as I learn more about it, I hear more and more things and more consistencies, more and more inconsistencies. It's the same with classical music. You hear more and more, and you develop a sense for it. It's the same with food. It's the same as getting into any kind of. It's
the same
thing.
with other kinds of music. I like to use the example of like Tejano music or something where.
All of your examples are like just causing me to Google.
Well, okay, so Tejano music or like conjunto or like these.
It's all different forms of Mexican American music.
Yeah, Mexican American music.
Yeah, say that.
And it's all kind of.
I am the quintessential layman here, guys.
Yeah, it all kind of has its own kind of set of rules and set of like specific rhythmic language and specific. Some people call it like oompa music. It kind of derives from polka. And so many people like to say. I mean, because I grew up in South Texas, like the kind of counterculture of like punk rockers and stuff, like not to say that they're disrespectful or anything, but let's just say people who only listen to pop music might say like, oh, that all sounds the same to me.
Yeah.
And it does. It sounds the same to me. I don't listen to it actively. I don't listen to it intentionally. But it's not all the same. It's different in important ways to the people who listen to it and to the people who know what to listen for.
That's very fair, and I agree with you completely. That does span pretty much all genres. Because like if somebody said to me like, I mean, I really got into like modern punk, and if somebody said to me that say Saves the Day sounds exactly like Say Anything.
Yeah, and I was actually I was thinking of doing a drop the needle test with punk music just to see if I could trip you up.
Oh, please. If it's modern punk, let's bring it the hell on.
I didn't prepare, so
all
we're
right.
not going to do it today,
we'll do it for another episode.
And
I'll tell you that later.
The act of learning and the act of training yourself and the act of listening to the same piece over and over and over again and hearing new things, that's part of the fun of classical music. But that's something that you can't get from 2 emails that we sent you.
Here's they were long emails, guys. I can't stress how much music you guys sent me to listen to.
I'm not being like facetious. Like it really is just scratching the surface. Like it really is.
I believe you.
There's not enough there to give you a full context and to give you a full like development of why is John Adams so long? Why is his music so long and so repetitive? It's because it's a product of minimalism. And where did minimalism come from? It came from electronic music originally.
Well, let me ask you this. If you guys are at a concert for classical music, at like a John Adams concert, are you sitting there listening to that thing? Do you ever like tune out and just let your mind wander, or are you in it for the whole thing?
I could. I mean, it would depend on how I'm feeling that day, but I could definitely be in it. It's active listening. This is something that gets talked about a lot in music school, is like active versus passive listening. And there are people I went to school with who won't listen to an album of music unless they can listen to it from beginning to end. They won't listen to one song, you know? Not all music is intended to be consumed that way. Classical music is intended, I think the only workable definition of classical music at this point, because it encompasses so much, it encompasses like 500 years of history, 600 years of history that we have written down, and it goes back before that, you know. The only thing that really ties it all together was all music that was intended to be listened to live in a concert setting. And so sometimes people call it concert music.
Is that why the tuxedos? Because it was like a big event to go out?
Well, I have a thought on actually from a historical concept. The idea that you would go to a symphony, for instance, or any kind of piece of classical music, and sit there from beginning to end and watch it is a relatively new concept. Because during the classical period and before, if you had gone to a symphony hall, it would be akin to going to see a band at a bar. You would get drinks, you would talk to your friends, you would see what people were wearing, you'd just be in the symphony hall. The idea that you would stay and sit and listen and be cultured, roughly 200 years old.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And
how long do you think classical music has existed?
600-700 years.
All right.
And before that, before the classical, and this is why the classical is kind of like a period that vexes me, is like the classical period, which is roughly 1650 to 1750, is that right?
No, that's the Baroque period.
That's Baroque, so it's shifted up 100 years. That's like the rise of pop music, basically. That's when, before that, music was mostly either street music that was never written down, we don't have a great record of it, or it was church music. And so, again, captive audience, a formal audience. So that's classical music. That's why classical...
It was their punk rock.
It was their punk rock.
Gotcha.
Mozart was their Madonna.
Huh. That makes sense.
That's actually a very good comparison, Mozart and Madonna, in a lot of ways, yeah.
All right. Okay, that's... okay, but... so, why the tuxedos, then?
The tuxedos came from a product of dressing fancy. It was a big part of going to see a piece of classical music in, I would say, late 1700s to mid 1800s, that you would go and dress up and show off how fancy you were. And everybody would go and they would look at each other. In fact, they did not start turning the house lights off until like 1810. You would keep the lights on, you would look at each other, you would talk to each other, you would point out her dress, his suit. And it was just a way to show off. And the idea that...
So it was based in vanity.
A lot of it is.
Well,
I mean, vanity, pretension has always been a big part of classical music.
Think about how people were dressing at the time anyway. You know, men were always wearing hats and vests, and it's...
If you're going to spend that much time on a wig, you want people to see it.
Yeah.
Not going to turn the lights off.
And it also, it kind of coincides with the development of music as an art form. Like, people didn't go to see Mozart because they wanted to see high art. Mozart kind of had two modes. He had kind of like the people's mode and then like the aristocrats mode. Mm-hmm. He'd write different music for different people. But it wasn't until a little bit later that people actually started to think of concert music as being high art and universally high art and not pop music anymore. And so even today, when we go to a fancy gathering, we still dress up. We sometimes wear tuxes. It's not...
You don't have to. There's no dress code.
I think it's just because uniformly I only see classical music in like ball gown attire, but...
Well, that's because, I mean, and I've gone to...
And I have not seen that much.
You know, and we used to go to the symphony in college just for fun. Mm-hmm. You know, we were classical guitar majors, so we didn't have any investment in it academically necessarily. We would just go because we liked going, but we'd wear jeans and like once my friend wore shorts to the symphony, and there were we call them the blue hairs, which is like the old ladies, and as students we would get orchestra seat tickets, which are like that's like the front row basically. Yeah. And so we'd be wearing t-shirts and jeans sandwiched in between like old ladies in like dresses and dudes in suits and stuff. People usually don't wear a tux and they don't wear ball gowns usually, unless they're performing.
I mean the performers. Yeah. Because if I saw classical music being performed by people wearing jeans and stuff, mm-hmm. if I saw like a hat, like I'd be like a bit more into it because I feel more comfortable to.
I totally
enjoy
agree, and there actually are orchestras. I don't have a specific one on demand in my brain, but that are intended to be more accessible in that way.
Well, just to keep things moving, though, why are conductors necessary? They all have sheet music in front of them.
Yeah, absolutely. They do two things primarily. They do a lot. that keep everybody in time. So the way sound works, and this is a bigger issue in bigger ensembles, an orchestra, for example. The timing of the string bass to the violin from right to left. If the violin is only listening to the string bass, they're going to be out of time with the rest of the violins because sound has a delay. So that's part of it. It's just coordination.
Oh,
The
sound
baton
does have a delay.
Every place in air that the baton goes is a different beat in the measure. So
it's also keeping everybody on task, and as far as like exactly where you are. If you have, and this is a problem, like I played percussion in high school in the orchestra, and like you get a piece of music and it's 120 measures of rests. Like you don't want to sit there and count count to 4 120 times because you're gonna get off and you're gonna come in early. So you're watching the conductor and you're going, okay, I recognize this piece. I mean, this part of the music, and the conductor's gonna cue me when it's my time to come in. So I have like 3 or 4 layers of redundancy as far as like knowing where I am in the music.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
But that's only the conductor's secondary role, really. The conductor is also interpreting the music. So the conductor is determining how fast is this piece going to be. I have 2 examples of one piece of music I really like. One of them's too slow and I hate it, and the other one's the right speed and it's awesome. And how dynamic are we going to be? When we crescendo, is it going to be a huge crescendo or is it just a small crescendo just to let the music breathe? And so the conductor is the one who's responsible for making sure the music translates from the paper to the ensemble. Otherwise, you'd have 100 people.
So could it be
different
than they rehearsed it from like in rehearsal than the actual performance?
Oh, every single time, because especially if you're not rehearsing in the room that you're performing in, it's very, very possible that if you're in the violin section over here and your percussion section back there, you can't hear each other. The conductor oftentimes, I don't know how true this is, but it's supposed to be that the conductor is the first line of defense against mistakes because he's the only person who can hear everything at once. Mm-hmm. Having conducted myself, though, I can tell you that there's a lot of stuff you can't hear from that close.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and I also conducted in school. I was not good at it. Mostly because I'm like a jittery lemming. Anyway.
By the way, listen to Grant's upcoming album, Jittery Lemming.
Yeah, my first album.
It's harder to say.
My first album
by BMI.
Yeah. My first album is I Hate Ukulele, and my second one is Jittery Lemming.
Your artist name is I Am a Hypocrite.
Yeah.
Because you were really good at ukulele.
Oh, thank you. I'm really good at classical guitar, and I decided to play something on ukulele. It's a transcription from it's originally a cello piece by Bach. Then I learned it on guitar 10 years ago, and then I was like, oh, well, I have a chance to play it, so I'll transcribe it to ukulele.
I'm glad you did. And I'm sorry to keep things rushing. No. We're just a little short on time today. I think the length and repetition is my biggest sticking point here because honestly, all classical music just sounds like it's music wood nymphs do chores to. Like it's so. I get that. Like every single time, my mom has been like, "Oh, listen to this one piece." And I could just see her being transported. And I'm sitting there going like, I'm still in the Subaru Outback.
Yeah.
Like,
first of all, the car is the worst place to listen to classical music. But
really?
Yeah, because...
Briefly explain why.
You can't hear anything. There's so much going on that you can't hear. Again, like classical music's complex and there's little tiny, like if you're missing a cue, if you're missing like a counter melody or something that wasn't there before, it's going to sound the same. So something has changed, but you're not hearing what's changed. But also, there's so much to unpack here. We're not going to be able to do it. But the reason that minimalist music like John Adams is so much longer and so much more repetitive is by choice.
That's a bad choice.
No. It's a good choice when you know what's happening. Things are changing in a systematic way. And if you're able to follow those changes and go and see how like the rhythms are no longer like they're no longer lining up the way they used to be, or
so it's kind of like some sort of weird mathematical algorithm?
Yes. At its very worst, it can actually literally be a mathematical algorithm. At its best, it's something looser than that, I think. But and see, that's exactly the reaction that I was hoping you'd have is like, there's something here that I don't understand. And if I did, I think I might understand. I might appreciate it better.
Yeah, it feels like classical music is a big puzzle that like to really appreciate and to really enjoy, you've got to dig deep. It's not like a TV show where you watch the pilot and you've at least got some of a grasp on. You really have to dedicate yourself and to have that want to get into it.
Well, also it's a never ending course of study. Like once you hear a piece you like, then you can put it in historical context. That's when it gets really fun. Then you can learn about the composer, what he was going through when he wrote it.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of what I put in my massive email to you was like it's just footnotes of like the context of the composers that I really love and like what was interesting about them.
All right. Okay, that gives me a bit more appreciation for it.
But I'd like to hear more of your strong feelings. Like what else did you not?
It's just so fucking boring and repetitive most of the time. Like, I wrote, like, it's like if Dream Theater just played one fucking chord for a half hour.
No, but it's not.
That is my understanding of Dream Theater.
It's a lot of the time. I'm not a big Dream Theater fan, let me clarify, but they do things like they mix it up. And,
yeah, but I would say Dream Theater is trying to be classical music. Like that's the thing with prog rock is they're trying to be more like. And
also they're using instruments that I find more accessible.
Yeah, exactly. You understand that. But I mean, there's literally
fair.
a phenomenon of if you recognize the sound of an instrument, you could, if I played Bach on like shamisen or something, which is like a Japanese instrument, it would sound totally weird and totally it might sound super cool. Like to me, it probably would sound super cool.
I mean, at least sound interesting. So Grant, I'm glad you brought up that Bach piece. Just real quick, I love you. I respect you. That I think that you're a genius.
I don't know any of those things.
You are never ever allowed to use the phrase "funky horn" again to describe anything because that Bach piece, it had like there were two notes coming out of the horn. I was expecting like, oh shit, this is gonna get moving. What was the Bach piece?
What did I say?
Was it Brandenburg Concerto?
No, I don't remember sending you.
Well, let's talk about Bach horns because that you might feel differently if you knew that the horns that they were using at Bach's time and possibly in that recording were period horns that could not do the same things that horns were doing today. So what might take a horn player to do today took an incredible...
You're going to have to vocalize that.
Just moving my fingers as though I was on trumpet valves.
Okay.
Would involve an incredible amount of throat, mouth, and face work. Embouchure work is a technical term for it on a horn back then.
They didn't have that kind of technology to do that.
Yeah, valves weren't invented until like the, late 1800s?
I don't know the exact answer for that one, but it's fairly recent.
The instruments
because I just sat there going like, well, that's the waste of a great funky button horn. That's I know terms.
There was a period when when horn instruments didn't have valves or
that's the majority of the history of horned instruments.
It was just a bugle. You just had to play notes that you could play by changing your
How did they
lips.
play anything on a cracker?
On a cracker?
Dumb bugle joke.
I would have said chip.
No, let's edit that out.
Yeah, let's
keep it in. Let's have the whole.
I think the rule of podcasting is anytime you say let's edit it that out, it has to stay.
Yeah, no, I'll just sit here steep in my shame. Okay, so wrapping things up. Real super quick. I do want to just talk about the lack of lyrics. But I honestly, I do think like that is just the fact that I don't speak other languages.
And I don't know if I actually
you sent me one piece that had
that was in English,
and I found that to be pretty engaging.
I tried to send you pieces with subtitles.
Yeah, I might have been sure on the Shining Knight, which is a really popular thing for like young vocalists to learn.
Yeah, I'll tell you the ones that I liked were Appalachian Spring was boring until the crescendo. Then it sounded like an epic victory in a sports movie.
That's Aaron Copland.
Yeah,
Maher's Second Symphony was all right, not boring, just sounded like a movie soundtrack. Concerto de Toronto was great. What was that Jupiter? The full name of the Jupiter one?
Holst the Planets.
Holst the Planets. That was pretty cool.
You should listen to the whole thing because it's super awesome.
Oh, I halfway through Chichester's Psalms, it turned into a dramatic moment from Star Wars. And Commodore Scene got that. I got that intense stuff was happening, but it sounded
opera's a whole other beast. Like you can love classical music and not be crazy into opera, and vice versa.
We'll do an opera episode. Yeah. All right, so if I started out as a 7. I think I've learned that just to really fully appreciate classical music, you got to dive into it a lot deeper, and you got to really dedicate yourself to it. Now that I understand that it's all so much layered, that I just see it's all a puzzle I haven't quite understood yet. That gives me a bit more appreciation for it, and I'm not so annoyed by it. I just know that I'm not. trained to
And
listen to
it's
it.
not your fault.
It's not my
Oh, it's
fault.
100% not your
my
fault.
It's not my fault. All right. If that's the case, it annoys me less. I can respect it more. And I guess all the stuff I found pretentious is just because it's rooted in tradition.
Exactly.
All right.
And
So-
we do
and
it.
pretentiousness. There.
And pretentiousness.
There's some pretentiousness.
It is
for sure.
pretentiousness, but they know it.
Yeah.
They know it,
Well,
and it's not I'm better than you. It's just I've been training in
people
this.
don't wear bathing suits to the Oscars, you know.
Basically.
Well, I mean,
Some of
they
them.
don't wear much clothing all the time, but it's formal.
Okay, it's formal. All right, maybe somebody send me one of like people in jeans and a t-shirt playing classical music. That could be interesting to me, as long as it's not like fucking 3 hours. Send me like a 6-minute one. All right. If it started at a 7, I think now I'm down to a 2. I think
that's what I
I
was hoping
can
for.
respect it a lot more. It's not something I'd listen to out of choice. Maybe I'm even at a 1.5. I don't know. We'll just say 2. I get that I don't get it, but I can respect it a lot more.
Great. I think if you find a couple pieces that you like and you dig into those and you kind of work outward from there, you'll find more stuff that you like. You don't have to like all of it, and you don't have to dedicate yourself to all of it.
Okay.
It's 600 years of music. You probably you said you're into like new punk. That's probably like what?
That's one of the
20
things I
years
like.
of music at
Yeah,
most.
And even Grant and I said
stuff
that,
like that.
neither one of us like the whole breadth of classical music.
Exactly.
Like you're gonna find, it's like saying you don't like chicken parmesan, and then saying you don't like the entire Italian food.
Right.
All right.
You know?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Also, meatball parmesan is better. So.
I agreed.
100% agreed. Yeah.
High five on that.
I think that's a three-way agreement.
We're all friends.
Yeah, we did it. All right. Tom, do you have anything to plug?
Yes, you can follow me at Tom Rizzuto, 2 Z's 1 T on Twitter. Also, if you'd like, you can listen to my segments on the Rock and Roll Archaeology Project podcast. I do segments for their weekly show, Rock Talk. And in the new year, I will have my own podcast called The Music That Made Our World, talking about the intersection between music and history. And you can like that on Facebook now if you'd like.
Wonderful. I'll make sure to do that. Grant, do you have anything to plug?
There's this show that I do with this guy Aaron Gold
Hi.
called You Are Not Alone, an uplifting show about depression. It's generally the last Friday of every month. It's supposed to be the last Friday of every month.
We got that for the next several months.
So come check that out. It's at the Magnet Theater in Chelsea, in New York City, in New York State.
In New York, America.
If you can't find it from there, then I can't help you.
You can follow this podcast at Don't Mind Podcast pretty much on everything. Also, we've got an email now, don'tmindpodcast@gmail.com. Send us your stuff. If you want to just yell at me, you can do that on any of the social media stuffs, or send us an email. Get in contact. Let's get a dialogue going. You can also follow me personally at Hey, it's Aaron Gold on those very same things. All right. Now, before we leave, if you leave us a review on iTunes, I'm going to read your name along with something that I like about you. And so I'd like to read these names. Ward the Ward. I like that you are Burt Ward learning how to be somebody. Probably you're Robin. You're Robin. Stover User. I like that you cook. Probably. And Elia Berman. I like that you are like a Jewish bear man. That's
Nice.
what I'll draw from your last name. Grant?
Yes?
Oh, it just looked like you had something to say.
No.
All right, well then, Tom, thank you so much for coming on. Grant, thank you again.
I'm
This
always here.
podcast would not
Thank you for letting me talk this time.
Thank you for everything on this podcast. Is one of my favorite things to do. And all of you, thank you for listening. And as always, Grant's favorite catchphrase, keep on minding.